listening to Muslimish Freethinkers, a podcast dedicated to fostering conversations on matters of faith and disbelief.
All human from clay. ومن آياته أن خلقكم من تراب ثم أنتم تنتشرون. I put many different translations because there are so many translations of the Holy Quran and they are all different. So and of His signs He created you from dust. It doesn't say dust here, it says dirt. Turab is dirt. Then suddenly you were human dispersing. So He's talking about us human. If He's talking about us human being created from dirt, but we all know that we have fathers and mothers, all of us, with no exception. Why did you isolated Adam from in the other verse? Why couldn't Adam have mom and dad, for example? This is a similar verse. And here another verse, which is also they use in the same fashion. The likeness of Jesus is with Allah is as the likeness of Adam. He created him from dirt and then said unto him, be, and he is. If you look at this verse closely, also they use that verse as a proof that evolution does not exist. But if you look closely at this verse is not talking about Prophet Adam at all. It's talking about Jesus. Think of it like in a way, let's say I'm saying, I created Ali. The example of Ali for me is like the example of Aristotle. I created him from dirt and told him to be. Here I'm talking about Ali, I'm not talking about Aristotle. Same thing here, God is talking about Jesus, is not talking about Adam. He's saying that He created Jesus from dirt and told him to be. But we all know that Jesus had mother. So how does that explain Adam being created different than Jesus? Or different than any one of us? Does not explain it. They cannot explain that. It's just they have to explain this before they can prove that it's from clay directly to human, which is not possible unless we prove that we did not come from mom and dad. Another verse that they use to prove that evolution did not exist, that God sent a viceroy, or in different translation, a ruler to earth, or in different translation it says successor to earth. God is going to send a successor to earth. If we accept that, God means that Adam is going to come from somewhere in heaven, in the skies, to earth, and he's a ruler or successor, or wherever it is. If it's understood in this literal way, then there are other verses that we have to explain that are similar to that. For example, he talked about King David, Prophet David. He said to David that we created you as a viceroy or as a successor on earth. If we are to accept that David came in from father and mother, then we have to accept it for Adam also. We cannot exclude Adam from this. Another verse they use to prove that Adam came from heaven down to earth, as one says, he said, go down from hence, one of you is flown to the other, there will be for you on earth a habitation and provision for a while. So what did God mean when He said go down from hence? Here's another translation that go down from this status. Status may be the better translation or better interpretation of the verse. It's not go down from some place to another place. It's the status that he was in, and the status or the state that he's in. In God's eye, we're all different. We're not at the same state. We're not at the same level. We are at different levels based on three things. It's not on class, it's not on money, it's not on race, on anything. We are in the eyes of God three states. The believer, how much of a believer you are, how much contributor you are, and how much knowledge you have. Those are the states that makes you different than others in the eyes of God. From what you can see here, for all there will be ranks from what they did. You do a good deed, you do good contribution, then you're a better human. You're at a higher level, a higher state. If we look at the third one, Allah will exalt those who believe among you and those who have knowledge. Knowledge is another way that a human can be at a higher state. So go down from it. It's not going down from somewhere in the sky down to earth. It's just going down from the state that he belonged to at that time. So now this is a sample of the verses that interpreters use to prove there is no evolution. Now, does the Quran talk about evolution at all? It depends how you understand the Holy Quran at the end. So I had a story with this verse in particular. I used to read the Quran all the time. I still do read the Quran all the time, and I don't know how many times I read the whole Quran. I probably lost count 20 years ago, if not more. But one time I'm driving in the car and I come across this verse, وَرَبُّكَ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ إِنْ يَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ وَيَسْتَخْلِفَ مِنْ بَعْدِكُمْ مَا يَشَاءُ كَمَا أَنْشَأَكُمْ مِنْ ذُرِّيَّةِ قَوْمٍ آخَرِينَ. He can do away with you and substitute you whoever He will in your place, just as He produced you from the descendant of other people. So as I heard this verse, probably for the 100th time, I don't know how many times I heard it before, after I studied evolution, this verse meant something else to me. So I went back on that tape to see who is God talking about. It cannot be about a certain group of people. It's got to be about a human race. And I went back and I saw the beginning of the verse, O assembly of jinn and human. And then the talks goes on, and at the end He tells them that He can replace you as He produced you from the offspring of other people. To me, it means offspring of other human sapiens, Homo sapiens that were on Earth. To me, this is a proof of evolution, and that's not the only one. There's many other verses that prove of evolution, in my view. But this is also my interpretation. I could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. And I'm not saying this is fact. This is my interpretation of the verses. And one other verse here. فلينظر الإنسان مما خلق من ماء دافق يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب. If you look at the English translation to this, let men consider what he was created from. He was created from gushing liquid. Well, the verse says water, it does not say liquid. Issuing from between the backbone and the breastbone. I looked into the interpretation of this verse, and I found that most interpreters talk about man's semen produced in the backbone and woman's egg produced in the ribs, as the second verse shows at the bottom. Scientifically, we know this is not what happens, so we know it's wrong. But it's mistranslated. But it's mistranslated based to how much they understood the verse at that time, and you can't blame them. There's only so much science at that time. To me, this can explain right here. Life might have started at the bottom of the ocean, at the hydrothermal vent, and this is one of the scientific hypotheses at that time. It's not proven, but this is a gushing water. A male does not have a gushing water. Gushing water coming from between the rocks. The sulb means the rocks. And taraib is plural of dirt, plural of sand, layers of sand. Water coming from there. The beginning of life started there. And it was an area that's rich in the essential elements of life, such as CO2, amino acid, methane, all those elements that were necessary to start the life, they were available there, as well as a higher temperature there. Another verse that also prove this idea, or support this idea, not prove it, support this idea is وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ. What is the sulala? The way I understand it based on biology, sulala means sulala to DNA. And that's where the beginning started. Before bacteria, it was DNA, amino acids are coming together, nucleotides are coming together, creating the first DNA, and this DNA further evolved to become a bacteria and on. God is saying this is the beginning, and that's how this is how I take it. I don't blame the interpreters of the Holy Quran for what they have done, because this is all they knew at that time. But we know better now. Now we have a better understanding of science, and we should have a better understanding of the Holy Quran by now. This verse here, which is the last verse I'm going to be talking about, وَقَدْ خَلَقَكُمْ أَطْوَارًا, although He created you in stages. Do you not realize Allah created 7 heavens in layers, and He set the moon in the midst of the night, and He made the sun a lamp, and Allah germinated you from the earth like a plant. Isn't this evolution here? And who's saying these things? The one that's saying these things is Prophet Noah. This is before the flood. Before the flood, the human race was still limited to an area. In my view, flood did not cover the whole world. Flood covered the area where human existed at that time. And He took on the ship only the cattle, 2 pairs of each cattle. He didn't take the 70,000 different species of spiders, for example. He only took the cattle, 2 pairs of each. All the animals that are in the world did not suffer anything, because the flood did not go to Africa and Southern America and everywhere. It was only local to the area where the humans still lived. Before that time, before the flood, a human knew that they came in from ancestors. It wasn't something that they didn't know. Because they knew, Noah came and spoke to them in their language, what they understand. He's telling them, you know God created you in stages. You know God germinated you from earth. But after the flood, after the snake bottle of fact that when a human went through and went almost into extinction, it became a story and it became a myth after that, and stayed as a myth for a long time, up until the Greek philosophers and others. But between those 2 times, it was lost. And I like to give an example here, Abel and Cain. So if we are to accept that this is the first house on earth, Adam came down from heaven, and this is the first family, according to the Holy Bible, now Abel and Cain is not in the Holy Quran. There is a mention to their story, but it's not the full story. The story came from the Holy Bible. They were supposed to sacrifice something for the sake of God. One of them sacrificed the lamb, the other one sacrificed the grains. But the question here becomes, how could the first house on earth created agriculture? How could they have domesticated animals? This should tell us that they learned that from their ancestors, from their grandfathers and great-grandfathers, and the tribe that they lived in, that they were part of, except that they were more evolved than the rest of the tribe. Isn't that how evolution works? And that's all I have to say today, and thank you very much. I didn't take more time, did I?
Very good. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, the next speaker is Suhan D'Souza. He's a Muslimish organizer in Boston, Cambridge. I don't know if you go more specific. President of the Secular Society of MIT. Suhan is a graduate student at the MIT doing research in computational social science and the ethics of artificial intelligence. He has long led the Secular Society of MIT and has been active in Boston area secular activism, atheist organization, and counter-apologetics. He experienced his childhood and much of his adult life in the United Arab Emirates. He has also been active in theater and comedy. He's a stand-up comedian, so we're going to see a glimpse of humor in this presentation. To save time, the abstract is in your hands in the program, so I'm going to take no further ado and introduce Sohan. Thank you. Stop the...
Right, so I'm Sohan. I'm very honored to be here and speaking to you all. My talk is basically about not just limited to evolution. I'll be also talking about some of the other scientific apologetics. I will also be talking about some other scientific apologetics issues that I've encountered around Boston area, online and such. Are we done? Can I?
Yeah, we're good.
Where's the clicker?
Next week.
Where is it?
No, it's not. Sorry, I took your clicker.
Thanks. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is the just looking at scientific apologetics. I mean, there's many kinds of apologetics in theism in general. In this case, we're looking at the apologetics that's specifically related not to history or prophecy or things like that, or the nature of the soul, but specifically science. One of the theories is it possible to turn the lights down a bit?
We'll try.
Yeah, it's. So one way of going about this, as some have proposed, like Stephen Jay Gould, about non-overlapping magisteria, that science and religion answers very different questions. And another way is looking at a more literalistic approach. This approach is actually more common in Christianity, Christian apologetics, and especially like Answers in Genesis and other such institutes. I'm actually going to be, a lot of this is actually going to sound a lot like an apologetics talk, because I'm going to be presenting a lot of apologetics arguments. This is kind of meant to be an overview of such. The inherent view is like literalism, but it's more of trying to find ways to have conformity between the scripture and between scripture and the science, like basically reconciling. Finding reconciliation between the scripture, basically saying that the scripture is inerrant. There's nothing that in the scripture that is in error. If you find some kind of contradiction, it's basically some issue with your interpretation. And one of the other ways that apologetics works with theism is foreknowledge. This seems to be more something to do with with Islam than Christianity. It's like the scientific miracles of the Quran, for example. That's a well-known meme in Islamic apologetics. Specifically, Bouquetism. This is named after Maurice Bouquet, who was in the 70s a physician to the Saudi king, and he was probably one of the founders of Islamic scientific apologetics, where he claimed that things in the Quran were similar to scientific knowledge, and how could people back then have known about these things, and so on. So we'll start from the very, very beginning, the beginning of the universe. So this is a well-known Christian apologist, rather Judeo-Christian apologist, Gerald Schroeder. What he does is basically look at the scientific knowledge, what we have about the universe, the expansion, the sequence of events, and fits that to the interpretation of Genesis that has it takes into account a lot of time dilation. So it's like the universe was expanding, and the time time passed in a different way then than it did now. So that's one way, like Judeo-Christian apologists try and reconcile Genesis with the scripture. Whereas in the case of Islamic apologists, they have a slightly easier job here, because there isn't a clear, it doesn't proceed in a chronological order. There's no clear, okay, this happened, then this happened on the next day, this happened on the next day. It's kind of all over the place. One well-known apologist is Harun Yahya, and he, this Turkish guy who came up with this idea of the expansion of the universe being related to to the way it's described in scripture, where you have the heavens and the earth being joined. This is something you'll see in many apologetics, scientific apologetics claims that this refers to the Big Bang, for example. Although it's not like there was the heavens and the earth. I mean, one way to interpret this, okay, there's the heavens and the earth, and boom. But then again, this isn't quite the case of there being a distinct heaven and a distinct earth. It's like you could say there was matter, it was all like mixed together. In the early universe, then you have. Sorry, I think it skipped. Yeah. Some people interpret, for example, when it talks about the heavens being smoke, that it was talking about the early universe being full of hydrogen, and then the stars were forming. When we talk about the universe being drawn out of all the celestial bodies being drawn out of the primeval smoke, that of course depends on your interpretation, though, because then he turned to the heaven when it was smoke, and then and said to the earth as well. So at that point, supposedly the heavens was smoke, and the earth was a distinct thing that God could call to. So it's not clear that this is meant to be talking about like the formation of the cosmic disk and the stellar disk and such. This idea of the heavens and the earth being separated, by the way, is also found in Egyptian mythology, where you have the earth god Geb and the sky deity Nut, who the gods basically had them parted so that the earth would be held, the sky would be held above the earth, separating the two of them. Next, I'm going to be talking about some issues with interpretations of the solar system in Islam. So these are a couple of verses that talk about the orbits of the sun and the moon. Now, this somehow is being used by some apologists to claim that that heliocentrism was known, is foreknowledge of heliocentrism in the Quran. Because the moon has an orbit around the earth, and the sun has an orbit around the center of the galaxy. It's a bit of a stretch, though, because the critical thing in heliocentrism is the orbit, is the rotation of the earth. This is also indicated by this verse that talks about the sun not catching up with the moon, and the night not overtaking the day. Each in its orbit is swimming. So the idea of the sun and the moon, and the swimming in their orbits, and not mentioning anything about the orbit of the earth or the rotation of the earth, just sounds a lot like geocentrism, actually. Who believes in orbits of sun and moon? That's geocentrists. It's a bit of a stretch to kind of put it towards the sun orbiting around the center of the galaxy. Next, I'm going to be talking about the earth. So there's various ways that, various points at which the Quran mentions the creation of the heavens and the earth in 6 days. This is one of the cases, comports with the Bible. Now I'm not going to go into the whole 6 literal days thing or not. Let's say that days refers to periods of time. So we have these periods of time during which the 7 heavens were created within 2 days, right? And then the nearest heaven was adorned with lamps. This is the 7 heavens has been taken to mean either like layers of the atmosphere, of which there aren't actually 7, or the 7 planets. But that doesn't comport with like the nearest heaven being adorned with lamps, though, because, well, if the nearest heaven is one of the planets, for example, then that doesn't quite match up with our knowledge of the solar system. Again, it mentions the earth being created in 2 days, but the Quran also mentions that the earth's sustenance was created in 4 days, and after, or at the same time that the earth was being adorned with mountains and such. That doesn't quite add up to 6 if you include the amount of time that took to create the heavens. Some other claims that are used to claim that the Quran is scientific foreknowledge is the claim that iron was sent down via meteorites. Yes, iron does come down to the earth via meteorites. However, this knowledge was also known to the Egyptians, who in hieroglyphics described iron as being from the sky. And another one is this idea of the mountains being stakes to stabilize the earth as pegs sometimes. This is, that's not quite how mountains work, because mountains actually don't really stabilize anything. They actually, what happens when the crust, crashes into crusts in tectonic plates crash into each other, mountains are created. They don't really stabilize anything. They do go down to the earth, but they don't really stabilize anything. Next we move to man. I think some of this has already been covered by my esteemed predecessor. So this is some of the apologists and the different views. You have literal biblical apologists, talking about Bible now, Judeo-Christian apologetics. People like Ken Ham, for example, have a very literalist approach. They have the Answers in Genesis Institute, and they believe there was a literal ark, a global flood, etc. Then you have people like, for example, Kenneth Miller, who believe in something more like modern science. They believe that God kind of made the earth like some kind of a puzzle that was primed to unfold into the universe that we have now, including the evolution of humans. You have S. Joshua Swamidas, who has a very interesting claim that, everything evolved, and including the early humans, and then God specially created Adam and Eve contemporaneously, like at the same time, and put them among the humans, and they interbred with the humans, and became the ancestors of all of us, and somehow left no genetic trace. But that's how they explain how God could have created Adam and Eve specially, and they could have been ancestors of all humans. You've seen this verse already. He has created you in different stages and different forms. This is used by some apologists to claim that this is talking about evolution, this is talking about different stages of man, and not, say, different ages or different races, or different population clusters. And of course, the verse about creating man from sounding clay, from mud, that's of course in the Bible as well, creating man from clay. That's interpreted as, at least one apologist has tried to frame this to me as, well, clay contains moisture, and clay contains, minerals and stuff, and human bodies are made of minerals, so, kind of works like that. Regarding the Ark, Noah's Ark, this is supposedly a population bottleneck, at least in Christian, in literalist Christian interpretation. This is a population bottleneck, and all of humanity is reduced to this one family and their sons and their wives, who go on to repopulate the earth along with all the creatures. It's a bit of a stretch, though, because there are the other verses, for example, which talk about Noah, desiring that no other human be left on the earth. There's a verse which talks about a son of Noah trying to get on a mountain and not surviving the floodwaters, which would mean that there'd have to be some kind of a basin, I suppose, a flood basin, and then a mountain in it which is not higher than the flood basin. Because otherwise, the waters would just drain off elsewhere. And also, taking two of each animal, even if it wasn't every animal on earth, it would kind of make really more sense to just kind of march over the next hill, one would think. Just a possibility. So I got to check back and forth to make sure everything is showing up. Another claim that's claimed by apologists to say that Quranic scientific foreknowledge is that everything is made of water. Multiple verses talk about life coming from water. This isn't exactly rocket surgery, as they say. If anyone has dealt with anything desiccated, preserving by drying, you pretty much know, and rehydrating, you pretty much know that life, everything living contains a lot of water. This doesn't really hold a lot of water, shall we say. Am I supposed to be pointing this a certain way? Oh. And also this idea of of everything being divided into male and female. This is not the only verse which talks about it, but there are multiple verses that talk about we created you in pairs, male and female. The general observer might see this like someone just looking at plants and animals around them, looking at the farm or whatever. However, it doesn't take into account many asexual animal life. It doesn't take into account, for example, hydras, which reproduce asexually. It doesn't take into account, for example, there are animals, for example, which have 7 sexes. Thermophilia is the specific species, but that has 7 sexes, which it can choose among. So that isn't quite, it's an edge case, it's an exception to the rule, but still that's not quite matching up to what we know of biology. And other cases, this is another thing you'll hear that semen is created between the backbone and the ribs. It's claimed that this is referring to the backbone, meaning the bottom of the spinal column, and the ribs just meaning like the front of the body. But that could mean like anywhere. I think it wouldn't be surprising for someone to know that, given that if you geld a bull, for example, it shouldn't be surprising to know that you won't be producing any sperm after that. And another one, is for example, bones being covered with flesh, whereas the bones and flesh actually form together in the fetus. Some other ones, like for example, skin being consumed in fire, and therefore when the skin burns off in hell, you'll have a fresh skin to replace it so that you'll continue feeling torment. I would think that if you had, anyone got burned, you'd probably find that out pretty quickly, that you lose sensation, and that sensation is felt in the skin. And another one which I see now and then is the idea that this verse refers to the fingerprint. This verse refers to the fingerprints. Presumably, everyone is has an identity in their fingerprints. So this is how God can identify everyone and put them back together down to their very fingerprints. As opposed to, for example, being just putting everyone back together to their extremes. Like if you say you feel that wet, wet, wet song. I feel it in my fingers. I feel it in my toes. It's not the extremities. It's actually the fingertips. When the angels at the battle, they strike everyone at the fingertips. They're talking about the fingerprints. So, just some closing with some strategies. One thing I'd like to see more is development of scholarship, because I think we don't really have an answer, not just with Islamic apologetics, but also Christian apologetics in general. There isn't really any kind of really scholarly unified response to this, like any of these multiple Islamic and Christian and other such institutes devoted to apologetics, but nothing from the atheist side. It would also be great to have something like Iron Chariots, or something like a community resource that can be easily linked to. Like Bradley's law has it that the amount of energy required to debunk BS is an order greater of magnitude than the energy required to produce it. So it would really help to have a resource that you can just easily link to, searchable, indexable. And finally, core development. I often find that when I attend apologetics talks of all different religions, I'm often the only person trying to raise concerns, to question things. And I think that it would be great to have like a core of people who could be relied upon to go to these and coordinate questions, which would help deal with the balance of power between questioner and between the stage and the audience. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Suhan. Thank you, Suhan. So we had a Muslim perspective on the theory of evolution and how can we reconcile it with the Quran. And we had also a talk about criticism of apologetics. And now we're going to have an authority, scientific authority on the subject of evolution. And it's our honor to present to you Dr. Gonzalo Munivar, PhD in philosophy from University of California, Berkeley, and a master's in philosophy from California State University at Northridge in 1971, bachelor's in philosophy from California State University at Northridge in 1970, specialized in philosophy of science, neuroscience. His main research interest is in the experimental neuroscience, evolutionary biology, space exploration, philosophy of science. Dr. Munivar taught neuroscience, cognitive psychology, sensation and perception, abnormal psychology, philosophy of natural science, philosophy of space exploration, philosophy of biology, evolutionary biology, history of science, philosophy of mind, ethics, South American fiction, creative writing, logic, mathematics, history of philosophy, developmental psychology, and animal behavior. He has been awarded the Distinguished Research Award from University of Nebraska and the Nebraska Foundation Professorship from the University of Nebraska, and the Ethel Waters Kimball Fellowship from Stanford Humanities Center. Doctor also has a philosophical inquiry into the nature and limits of science, That's a published book, and he has several published books and tens and tens of really written articles and journals, a life spent in propagating of science and educating on the subjects of science, evolution and biology, psychology, etc. The talk will be about describing how Darwin's principles of variation and natural selection interact to account for the evolution of living things. Several examples will be provided to illustrate the main points, and explanations will be provided for some of the main implications of biological evolution. After that, we will have a panel discussion for about 30 to 40 minutes, and after that, we'll have a break where you can interact with the speakers directly. Without further ado, Dr. Munawar. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, now,
We'll put the presentation in a second and use the clicker.
okay, can I go now?
Yes,
Okay. I might have been an authority before I got old, so who knows now. Since I don't know anything at all about Islam, I don't want to say anything about Islam. Okay? Unless in the panel discussion somebody asks me a question so I can demonstrate my ignorance. Okay? Okay. So, I'm having trouble with this. It's gone. Okay. So there are two main factors that Darwin employs to explain evolution: is variation and natural selection. Well, I'm having a problem with this.
Yeah, it should be the arrows.
Where?
Yeah. There's the arrow only.
Doesn't do anything.
Oh, right, it's not working. Can I see? Oh, you don't want to have to click this one.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Just right and left only. Let me go back to it. Yeah, it's working. Okay, so.
Well, now we're going all over the place.
Yeah, so you go with this arrow, that's it, only.
Which one?
Left and right. So you can go back. So this one goes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I go right?
You don't have to, because you're clicking this one, that's why it happened.
Pardon me?
You're clicking this one, that's why it's not working. You have to click only this.
I'm touching nothing else.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
There's something else to
Yeah.
Yeah,
This arrow.
hold it this
Yeah.
way, the other way, this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which
And
one?
You just click right,
Yeah.
just once.
Oh,
Well-
just only once. Yeah.
Okay.
Only once, yeah.
Okay.
All right. My talk is supposed to be intended for a general audience, so I don't want to insult anyone who already is very knowledgeable about biology. So, variation, to begin with. You could determine variations in populations easily. For example, the width of noses. You just go outside in any city, you see some very narrow noses, some that are very wide. Most noses, though, will be, well, like the one in the middle over there, and they will fall within 2 standard deviations if you look at the graph. So we have this kind of variation in populations. And we should exercise populational thinking when we are talking about evolution, not about specific traits, one specific trait or anything like that, but a variety of traits that you could put on a graph like that. Where does this variation come? It comes from mutations. And mutations don't have to be horrible things caused by radiation or anything of the sort. It's simply that the DNA is a very complicated molecule, and the way it works inside the cell is extremely complicated. So it's very easy to have little changes. Some of those changes do not at all affect the production of amino acids that turn into proteins. Some of them do a little, and some of them do a lot. And of course, radiation can affect this too as well, but as I just said, it's not the main reason we have mutations. So mutations lead to changes, slight differences, and so once we have that, I'm now going to explain natural selection. If you look at that, everybody can see it, right? There are 3 graphs there. Look at the black one, the one on the left, and imagine an island. This island has these animals in them, these small mammals, with some amount of fur, and they're kind of cute and so on. But then after a while, the world begins to get cold. And so what is going to happen? What is going to happen is that the ones who are at one extreme, let's say on the right, the ones who have the most fur, will have the easiest time putting up with the cold. The ones on the other side will have a very tough time. They will be sickly often. They will not be able to find mates. They will have to get extra food, and they won't be able to. So who will be able to reproduce, that is to leave offspring more easily? Well, the ones that have the most fur. You see, that's what is going to happen. So if you come back thousands of years later, the population will have changed. So now what used to be having a lot of fur will look like having very little fur, because having fur provides such an adaptive advantage. So it will be the blue one. And then if you come back many, maybe hundreds of thousands of years later, the population will have changed completely, and it will be extremely furry compared to the earlier one. And so this is how natural selection works. You have some variation. Some of the individuals in the population are given an advantage by certain traits that they have vis-a-vis the particular environment. So they're going to reproduce more, and over time, the population is going to shift. Okay? So we have this long history about this species changing. Okay? That is what evolution basically tells us. It's a very, very simple idea. And now, from this simple idea, there are a whole bunch of different things that you can explain, but since we are way behind, I'm going to skip this particular slide. You could just look at it about the many different things that natural selection actually explains. And this led a very good experimental evolutionary biologist, David Resnick, who wrote a fantastic book, The Origin Then and Now, which is probably the best book on evolution that I have ever read. Okay, so I highly recommend that. It's about 10 years old or so. And what he said is natural selection is as central to the life sciences as gravity is to astronomy and physics. It definitely has a very important role to play. Now, let me talk now about speciation. After all, the title of the book was The Origin of Species. So what happens? Say you have these seagulls, and they start at first way at the top, and they begin to move to different niches. So as they move to different niches, they're going to change. That is, the population of that species are going to change some because they'll have to adapt to those niches. So what is going to happen is that one important characteristic to define a species, at least in animals, is that they're able to successfully mate. And successfully mate means not only that they produce offspring, but that the offspring themselves are successful. You can, for example, mate successfully a donkey and a horse to produce a mule, but the mule is not able to reproduce. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to mate and for their offspring to be able to produce offspring themselves. So what is going to happen in this kind of, it's called a ring species, because as you can see, you form a ring. So they start moving some to the west and some to the east, and then in each error, say the population that is right below that error is able to mate successfully with the next one, and maybe with the next one. Both going west and east, but when they meet way below, way south, they are not able to mate successfully anymore. Those have become different species. Yeah. Now, suppose that you have the same thing with these rodents in an island, and there is the same effect. So the ones that are next to each other, there is the populations that are next to each other are able to mate, but maybe not the one on the left and the one on the right on the other side of the mountains. And suppose right at the bottom of those mountains, you have a volcano. The volcano erupts, and the population on the left and the population on the right become geographically isolated. And since they are not able to mate, they effectively become two species instead of the one that they once had before. So this is standard way for species to form. There are many others, but I cannot discuss all of them. Now, about adaptation. The woodpecker seems to be extremely well adapted, almost perfectly adapted, you could say, to his environment. Okay? He has this extremely strong tongue. It's almost like a weapon, and it just goes and gets the insects and so on. Now, that seems terrific. But if you go to the Galapagos Islands of the coast of South America, the Galapagos was one of the important places that Darwin visited in his many travels. Well, if you go over there, you will find these finches. Finches are this little bird. You see at the bottom. Can you see this at the bottom? Okay. And they have become woodpeckers. They do not approach by any means the kind of perfect or almost perfect adaptation of a regular woodpecker. So what they actually do, these little finches, finches move from the continent of South America over to the Galapagos. They're probably carried by winds and so on. And once they were there, they had to eat something. So they ended up specializing different finches into different things. And some finches discovered that they could break off the needle of cactus. And then they could use this needle to go to the bark of trees and hit the bugs that were right between the cracks in the bark of the trees, and then bring it out and eat the bugs. So that's what that's doing in the bottom. It's extremely clever, but is by no means the kind of perfect adaptation. They came from somewhere else, they came to a new niche, and they made the best they could. Right. This is another case in which we could talk about convergent evolution. This is when two species come to do similar things even though they have different origins. And in this case, it's the regular wolf up there and the marsupial wolves. Remember, marsupials are the ones who have those pouches, and they carry the young in the pouches. So there's a marsupial wolf on the bottom. That's one case of convergent adaptation. Why? They have very similar niches, so it was possible for an animal to become more and more adapted by acquiring those kinds of characteristics that allow it to survive best in that environment. Tanzania, I think. Now, one question that is asked, well, how do we know that this really happened? I mean, that these things evolve. We just see them the way they are now. Well, there are standard ways. One of them is by paleontological record. That is, we look at bones. Sometimes we get lucky and we actually get tissue, and we can actually even get the DNA out of that tissue of dinosaurs and who knows what. So we can investigate all sorts of things, so we could see what creatures were like before and they are not now. and the bone record we could see, or the fossils, we could see how they have been this sequence, with horses and with many other things. But that is an even nicer way because it's so much quicker. And for someone lazy like myself, that works just perfectly, you see. And that is to look for vestigial features. So, for example, the whale. You have been told that whales are mammals, that once upon a time the ancestors of the whales walked on Earth. How do we know? They don't have legs now. But they have the bones, you see, for the pelvis, for the femur and so on. And they don't use them for anything. They just keep them in. They're vestigious, just like memories of all times. That would make absolutely no sense unless Darwin was right. And here we could see how some of them actually have been adapted. So birds have wings that depend on an extension of the digital of the arm, and bats, which also fly, and that I suppose a case of convergent evolution as well, they use the hands. The hand has been turned into a wing. As you can see, those are the bones of the hand. And that's what it has become. So we could see, again, evolution at work here. Now, I was asked to address this question. It would have never occurred to me. But apparently there are a lot of people who misunderstand evolution completely and ask this question. If we evolved from monkeys, why didn't the monkeys keep evolving too? So I'm going to address this question for the first time ever for me. Not ever for everyone, just for me, okay? First of all, we didn't evolve from monkeys. That's the first thing. Monkeys and apes evolved from a common ancestor. That was millions of years ago. Then the apes, eventually including hominids, like Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and so on, and even later, Homo sapiens, during that process of millions of years, evolved in separate ways. This is what happens. And by the way, monkeys did keep evolving. They have changed a lot since several millions of years ago. They have taken over all sorts of niches. Some of them are extremely nasty creatures. I think most of them. Okay. And if monkeys were as intelligent as we are, it would be terrible. They probably will have destroyed the world already. One thing that monkeys do in several of the species is when a new monkey becomes the top guy, the first thing that he does is kills all the babies. So the females stop lactating and will be available to him. That's the supposed explanation. But they sure are nasty to babies, in cases like that. Okay. Now, we have to stop thinking that somehow the goal of evolution is perfection. Evolution doesn't produce any perfection. Darwin wrote someplace, I have to keep reminding myself, in evolution we should never said better and worse. Yeah. That was not his goal, that's not the work of his discipline. And clearly there are many animals that are not, and plants that are not perfectly designed for their environments. There are animals that have birds that have webbed feet, even though they live in land. Yeah. So organisms are modified so as to adapt to the new environments. As Francois Jacob said, evolution is a process of tinkering with what you already have, not of engineering according to some ideal. That's how evolution is supposed to work. So the idea, well, I said that I wouldn't say anything about, but in religion in general, the idea that somebody actually perfectly designed everything, we have so much evidence against it. Well, just look around. So evolution means change, adaptive change, not increasing perfection. Now, there's also this idea about the monkeys. Why didn't they keep getting smarter and brighter and bigger brains and so on? Well, characteristics are useful to some organisms at certain times, in certain niches, but not to all organisms, at all times, in all niches. So one of the most important traits that we have, apart from our brains, is the opposable thumb. It's made a huge difference in our adaptation to the world and our success as a species, the opposable thumb. So as I showed that, you could grab tools, weapons, with an opposable thumb. All sorts of things that you can do. Cook, all kinds of stuff that will be very difficult without. Yeah. Is it useful to a species? Actually, once upon a time, some horses had the equivalent of opposable thumbs. And what happened to those horses? Well, when they were running, that opposable thumb got caught in weeds and things like that, and the horse would fall down, break his legs, and so on. So what happened to that species of horses? It went extinct. That's what happened to it. And as for cockroaches, where would you have a cockroach? Put a thumb. See? So just because brains are, the kinds of brains that we have are useful to us, it doesn't mean that they were useful to a cockroach. We have nothing to do with it. It's too much for it. Okay? And just to take away from this idea that evolution has a direction, imagine this. This is the creative part of the talk for you. Yeah. Imagine that there is a similar planet to Earth around some star that is very similar to the sun. So it has about the same size of the Earth, about the same mass of the Earth, about the same amount of water, a similar atmosphere, everything is the same. Will you expect the same sorts of species, the same species actually, to evolve there as they have on Earth? Well, no, except maybe for bacteria. Why? Because multicellular organisms have an almost infinite way in which they could possibly evolve. So, for just something that may happen in the Earth and didn't happen in the other planet. At some point, the continental masses move all the time, islands move and so on. We have tectonic plates, and the same will happen in a planet that is very similar to Earth, but it's not going to happen exactly the same way. So in one particular planet, some big islands come together to form a much larger landmass. And so what happens then? You can have animals who are very large and they have to go big distances. Elephants have to keep moving, by the way. And the reason is otherwise they'll get very sick. They dump these huge things on the ground after they eat, and bacteria take care of them. But it takes them a long time. So the elephants have to be somewhere else when they get the next meal, and so on. Well, these big islands will make it possible for big animals to evolve. But it doesn't have to happen in every place. There could be another planet in which such land forms do not come about. Yeah. The adverse asteroid, you've probably heard of this, hit the Earth. It's about 12 kilometers across of the province of Yucatan, of the peninsula of Yucatan in Mexico, and wiped out most of the species on Earth 65 million years ago. Most importantly for us, it wiped out the dinosaurs. They became extinct shortly afterwards, a couple of thousand years or so afterwards. That meant that mammals, which at that time were nocturnal well, they did not like that I was going to say that mammals were just vermin. They were just rat-like creatures hiding at night. Dinosaurs ruled the earth, you probably heard that. Well, but now mammals, and birds actually, which came from dinosaurs, could move into all those niches that the dinosaurs previously occupied. And what did they do? Well, they grew into all kinds of animals. Some of them very large ones, like elephants and humans. See? So, There have been other massive extinctions that also radically affect life. You cannot guarantee by any means that another planet that is very similar to the Earth will have that kind of evolution at all. So it's extremely unlikely, almost impossible, that they will have the same species as we do. The number of such contingencies is just almost infinite. That means evolution depends on chance. There, it depends on chance also in the way in which mutations are produced. And one last subject that I'm going to deal with, genes and traits. Just because you have, or some animals in a population have certain genes, doesn't guarantee that they're going to be successful, because those genes have to be expressed as traits. So what genes give us, and by the way, sometimes you require the whole combination of genes to produce anything, but what genes give us are really tendencies. For example, we may be born with a tendency to be tall because we inherit our dad's genes and he was very tall. Okay. Well, as long as you don't deal with malnutrition, if they don't feed you, you may end up not being very tall at all. Or all sorts of diseases that could affect you, that could stunt your growth. See? And development is crucial. So suppose a mother has a very good brain, the father has a very good brain, but when the mother is pregnant, she's drinking, or smoking marijuana. So there is a very high chance that the kid is not going to be normal. He's not going to have, he could be schizophrenic, autistic, who knows what, because the brain development is going to be affected within the mother's womb. So it's extremely important. Also medicine, or the mother got sick, any of those things in development. And by development, it's not only within during the embryonic stages, but even later. Let me give you an example. What is the most common, most basic instinct, you might say, that animals have? To mate, I would say, is definitely one of those, right? So, rats. The mother rat produces a litter of rats. And then what does she do after the little ones are in front of her? Well, she smells them and she licks the genital area of the male ones. Apparently, this increases the testosterone that comes to the testes. And if she doesn't do that, and they made sure that in one experiment, the mother didn't do that because they cut off her olfactory nerve and she couldn't smell them, so she wouldn't lick them. So what happens? These rats, these male rats, later did not ever try to mount females. They just didn't have it. Monkeys. Monkeys play with each other. They're about 6 months old or so. This particular species of monkeys, apart from play fighting, they're not really fighting, they're play fighting. They also have play sex, but this is just the males. They actually don't have any sex at all. They just, the one monkey will jump on the back legs of another monkey and makes these motions. It's not that there's really any kind of sexual activity at all, but they sort of act something that when they're later adults they will do. Now, if one of those monkeys is raised in isolation, so it doesn't have other little monkeys to play with, he will never do that. And if he doesn't ever do that, what is going to happen? Well, he will never try to mount a female later in life. This is how important development is. This play act actually triggers things in the brain, hormones and so on, that in fact produce certain developments. So the monkey will be actually instinctively trying to do that when he is older. Does it happen with humans too? Well, not exactly as monkeys. We don't play that way. But for example, if you don't have the right hormones at the right time, you could also affect such things as the attraction towards females. So they have, well, there is males, human males, have in the hypothalamus a very small nuclei. And this nuclei is actually very important. It grows to be of a certain size. But if it doesn't get the right hormones at the right time in development, even if you have the perfect genes, but doesn't have the right hormones at the right time because the mother got sick or who knows what, then this little set of nuclei is not going to grow. And if it, not very much. And if it doesn't grow as much as it's supposed to, these males will grow up to be homosexuals. Most of them. I mean, this sort of thing happens all the time. So I wanted to tell you about how complicated this whole thing about evolution is and why it works and what evidence we have for it. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of all of that. Yeah, I should stop now. I would, if you want to know more about all the stuff that has to do with what I just spoke about homosexuality and so on, it's in this book of mine, Sex, Reproduction, and Darwinism. It has actually articles by some 12 people, and mine is one of them. I was the one who edited it. And if you want to see how to use evolution to think about all kinds of subjects, including the natural science, then there is another book of mine called Evolution and the Naked Truth, amongst the books that were mentioned earlier. And if you hate to read serious essays, prefer to read fiction, then you could get my novel, Alex in Femiland. In chapter 2, there is a description of a seminar on Darwin and how shocking it is. Not to religious people, but to students who are all, how should I say, leftist, politically correct people. And so Darwin actually is a big shock to them. As one of them says, who is an environmentalist. Environmentalists believe in things like the balance of nature and things like that, which is complete crap, you know. And then he's just shocked. He says, well, this is going to be really bad for my politics. What am I going to do, you know? Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
You can join the...
Oh, okay.
You can actually have a seat here. All right, thank you, Doctor, and we're going to start the panel discussion right now. So if we have Sohan, please join us, and Mr. Dabaja, if you join us at the stage. We're also going to invite Imam Ahmad Saleh, Imam Dr. Ahmad Saleh, to join us, and Dr. Adnan Jaber to please join us on the podium. There's one mic that you will be sharing, and I'll be sharing my mic with the audience at the same time. Mahinaz, if you can put back the slide, please. And I'm going to start this panel discussion. We're going to go till 3, and then we're going to have 15 minutes break so you can intermingle with the speakers directly. Just the other slide as a background. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask the 3 speakers a question each, and then I will go to the audience to take your questions. So I'll start with Mr. Dabaja. Your presentation was very interesting. I wanted to ask you about your journey of trying to present your perspective to Muslims in general, and how is it received?
Well, it was an interesting journey, I can tell you that much. In the beginning, I went to kind of mental walls, started to reach people's mind in the beginning. And you did face a lot of challenges, a lot of arguments, heated arguments, and at some point it wasn't nice at all. Let's put it this way. And people wanted to argue with me before they hear me, before they read the book, before they do anything. They see the picture on the front of the book, that there is the evolution skeletons, and they just start arguing with me right then and there. And my main thing, I tell them, look, I cannot explain everything to you in a couple minutes, why don't you just read the book? It's a 2-hour read, it's a short book. Read it and come back to me and argue with me. A lot of them would take it very serious, but then I give an example of one person who I knew for like 30 years, who always bump into each other and talk to each other. So one time I dropped off a book at his work, and he saw the book, he saw my name, he didn't read the book. The next time he saw me, he goes to me, "Did you read this book?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you believe in evolution?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I don't believe in evolution." I said, "Why don't you read the book? Did you read the book?" He goes, "No, but I saw what it's about." I said, "I cannot convince you if you don't read the book. Just read the book first and then argue with me." He was very on edge. He really wanted to have a fight with me at that time. A couple months after, I went to the mosque, and I'm going to an event, and someone from a distance raised his hand, and he goes, "Gadwan, come sit here." I saw it was him, so I said, "Okay." I came sat next to him. "How's everything?" "Everything's good." So we're listening to the lecture. Somebody else came in, and he called him. He goes, "Come sit here." He sat next to us, and he introduced me to him. He goes, "This is Radwan. He made the book Theory of Evolution from the Holy Quran." And the other person right away, "What do you mean Theory of Evolution from the Holy Quran? I hope you don't believe in it." I said, "Yeah, I do." So the other person goes to him, "Wait, don't say anything. Don't make the mistake that I made. Go read the book first." And he wanted to continue arguing. He goes, "I'm telling you, don't say anything. Go read the book and then argue." I made that mistake and I argued with him before. And this was not just one time or two times, it was very common. But I was pleased to see most of them came back to me and apologizing and at least accepting evolution as something to think of.
Thank you. A sub-question to that, Dr. Ahmed Saleh. What's your reaction to Mr. Radwan's presentation?
I loved it. I just love every part of it. I think because many of the Quranic words that are being used, like sulb and tarahib and sulala, and those words are open to interpretation. The Quran is God's word, but we have human interpreters. And so I think it's just fascinating to see a fresh perspective. And I often believe that kulla yawmin huwa fi sha'n. Every day God ushers in a new freshness and gives some new insight and perspectives. So I'd like to read the book, and I really followed that very closely. And I think not a moment I felt offended. I think it also, it's very useful if the person presenting it is soft-spoken and gentle, and present that without, in a very calm and serene way.
Thank you. Second question is to Sohan. And your talk was about apologetics, and now it really doesn't really hit the right spot. A lot of these apologies, and would you consider the presentation of Mr. Radwan as one of these apologetic explanations?
Yes, I suppose I would. I think it's just, we should have a marketplace of ideas, and as it's good that apologists, keep trying and refining ideas and putting their best ideas forward, because it makes counter-apologists better as well. And it's not like this is going to be resolved anytime soon, but at the same time, I feel compelled to just make known that there are alternative explanations as well, and sometimes I leave it up to the audience to decide what is the most plausible interpretation, what is the most plausible one given the scripture.
Thank you. So you consider alternative explanations as a positive addition to the pool of thought?
Yeah, ultimately, as long as it advances, evolution, the science of evolution, yeah. I disagree with this idea that's necessarily compatible, or that is some kind of foreknowledge or anything like that. I would say that these things are meant to be read metaphorically,
and don't refer to like stages, refer to stages of evolution, or or the flood, for example. Don't try to apply that as
This is one of the complications of the theory of evolution, is that it's complicated, it cannot be explained in a short setting. Dr. Adnan Ibrahim, a very renowned Muslim scholar, had an opinion about evolution, but before giving it, he needed to explain it to his audience, and he ended up doing a series of lectures that
About 50, about 20 something.
20 something, each one is like an hour, 45 minutes, to get to the last lecture to say his opinion. I doubt that anyone will go through this 20-something lectures, but it was one of the most beautiful in Arabic explanations of the theory of evolution. Question to Dr. Mudabar, Professor. I actually have a personal question. I have a friend of mine who always tells me, I'll tell you one word, the Cambrian explosion, 541 million years ago, a sudden appearance in the fossil record of a huge number of new species. He says, this is when God interfered. What would be the scientific explanation?
Well, there were eukaryote cells already about almost 2 billion years ago, which quickly became multicellular animals, small ones of which they would be very difficult to find fossil records because they would have been destroyed a long time ago. So what we actually have is a period for quite a long time of these things evolving until they have all the basic animal forms. And so what we had in the Cambrian explosion was a big fight for the resources of the Earth. And so it is not at all very surprising. It's not sudden. I mean, if something takes 1.5 billion years, I would think that's not really sudden, even by astronomical standards. So I think it's completely mistaken. By the way, if I may comment briefly on what the other people have said, again, I don't have any experience with Islam, but in the Christian world, the hostility to Darwin, one or two commented on, was tremendous. But that did not happen with Catholics. The Catholic Church was never opposed to Darwin. And the reason was that they took such a horrible beating with what they did to Galileo, that they didn't want to go and look like idiots again. And that's why the Catholics basically stood up. In fact, another thing about Catholics, when I was growing up, Catholics very rarely, if ever, read the Bible. I never read the Bible until I came to the United States, and it was in every hotel room that I went to, there was one. So I read it. By that time, I became an atheist when I was 14, and if I had read the Bible, I would have been an atheist by 12, if not earlier. But the reason the Catholic Church did not want people to read the Bible, well, there were two reasons. One of them is that they wanted people not to form their own opinions, but to get the official doctrine of how the Bible ought to be interpreted. And the second one is that this happened once in a while in the history of Christianity, is that they thought that there were two kinds of ways of looking at the Bible. One of them, it was the literal truth, which immediately gets you into all kinds of trouble right away. Or the other one is that it was just stories that were told to these primitive peoples, but it was more like allegories. So what we had to get was the allegoric meaning of this. And then they could give us guidance to a better life, that sort of thing. And of course they did believe in God and so on, but not that the details were true. And for quite a while after the beating they took from Galileo, that has been the preferred approach by the Catholic Church.
Thank you. I would like to give opportunity for the audience to really participate. Mr. Raja.
Thanks for the effort to give this presentation. I have a question. The theme of the sleeping and science coexist. I think if you ask that question in the 7th century, the answer is yes. Why? because the revelation of Islam or the Quran contains so many scientific facts, but it was based in the science, the level of the science back then. There were like a university called Nisabur, and back then they studied human body. So every science idea in Quran, it was based on the level there. Then things advanced, and after 1400 years, I think that science did advance, but the text of the Quran stayed the same. Even the exodus of the text of the Quran stayed the same. So when we answer now the question that can Islam and science coexist, I think the answer is yes. When you say yes, I think that's a probably correct statement. Does it help? I think it helped to soften that attack on the scientific community. But in terms of science, I think it does not help at all.
Well, when the Christian mobs destroyed the Library of Alexandria and killed many of the people who worked there and burned most of the books, the few scholars were able to escape, and they escaped to Arab and Persian countries and so on. So when those countries became Islamic, they had some of the literature from Greek science. And then later, that literature was translated into Arabic, and it was expanded more and more. And so the golden age of the Arabs, which was in Spain actually, particularly in Granada, they had great universities where Aristotle in particular was expanded more and more. And later, the greatest observatory in the world, before telescopes, was also created by people who were Islamic. So science was preserved and actually in many ways enhanced, Greek science, by Islamic scholars.
Would you like to comment?
What was the exact comment that you made?
It was about the development of the relationship between science and Islam after the 7th century to today.
I think when the Prophet just laid down the foundation to be literate, I mean, here he captures the soldiers in Badr, the Quraysh, and he says you could be free if you teach literacy to 10 persons, and that will. So I think that just that Iqra community within a matter of just a few years, you had this amazing scholars, even taking slaves and forcing those slaves to be scholars, like Mujahid and many of those other persons. So I'm not sure if there's a real connection between what happened in Egypt with the hieroglyphics and all that, if there was anything coming through at that time. But I do know that even a number of the Jews also migrated when they were persecuted prior to the time of the Prophet. The Arabian Peninsula was a very safe haven for them. So you had a huge type of capital around there, and they picked up that intellectual capital, and they then shared that, especially with the Hajj, with people coming. So yes, I think that that development took place with a quantum leap rather than just something. I had actually one or two quick other questions that I felt that sometimes I feel sometimes Muslimish, in the sense that I'm constantly a person in progress, trying to find my Muslimness and understand more parts. I sometimes think there's an idea in the Quran that amounts to what I call devolution, kunu qiradatan khasi'in, turning into apes and pigs and all that. And I wonder if that idea has been explored among atheists, if there's ever been a devolution. I mean, if I think from what happened to Jefferson to Trump, it's definitely a devolution there. I mean, how could we have an idiotic chief becoming our president? So that's those are two things. The issue of devolution. The other thing I'm wondering is history really linear? And if we've lost the sciences of the pharaohs and the people of that time, or the sciences of the Aztecs, while were there pockets of excellence in previous eras that we've completely lost and we cannot even reproduce those pockets? Islam has never been linear, because when Islam, for instance, was in Andalus, there was an amazing enlightenment, then was some backwardness, but then Islam was evolving in the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire, so it's never been, are we seeing history in a linear way, or those are some of the things?
Great, so let me see how many questions from the audience. If we have any questions from the audience, so we will delay commentary on what you said, Imam, until the start of the doctor.
With respect to the court system, would it be possible to conclude or deduce from the history or what we learned in this in the area where the Islamic State was in Andalusia, and what we've had a freedom of speech and freedom of thinking and freedom of at least concluding, and let scientists do science for the sake of science. And I'm here, I'm dreaming that would we be able to improve both religion and science if we leave the scientists do the science for the sake of science, and eventually we'll get to the point where spirituality, if religion offer us some spirituality, some confidence, and some relaxation, and some happiness in our life, there would be, can we have a coexistence of the two? Okay.
You want someone specific or not?
I would like to add to Aoun's point about Islam, and I think the conflicted relationship that between science and religion that we kind of like history of Christianity, and the stories we taught about Galileo and Copernicus. I don't think Islam had gone through it, as Dr. Munabar was talking about it. There's a different context there, a different historical context. But I think also we might also be falling into too simplistic of view of glorifying these scientists that were Islamic in nature, like Avicenna, Ibn Rushd, and all of these, because even these people were kind of persecuted. Their works were created as products of the devil or of people who are trying to downgrade the importance of God. So Ibn Rushd's books were burned also in Spain. Other scientists or philosophers at that time were called like infidels and other things. So I think we maybe kind of like an apologetic thing, trying to just glorify a period in the time of Islam as this proves that Islam and science can coexist. I think there's many historical factors and contexts that should be taken into account, but at the end of the day, there was a lot of tension, between what is called the Islamic authority, because that's the issue with authority, any religious authority, that the claim that they have the key to the truth and that the truth is handed to them, and you're not allowed to participate in it. So they might give you a couple of inches to talk about certain things, but once they realize that you're challenging their authority, problems will arise, and that's what happened in the history of Islam, as in Christianity and other religions.
Thank you. Professor Rahman?
So this is a question for Mr. Raja. Very interesting talk. The question I had emerged as I was listening to the talk, and it sort of reinforced when I listened to you, Dr. Munabar, had to say, Dr. Munabar, one of the things she pointed out was that evolution is not perfect. Right? There's an objection that I find interestingly coming from both creationists and atheists against theistic evolution. The objection is, if this were true, it would seem that God has employed a very painful, long, wasteful process to bring about Homo sapiens. Right? I'm just wondering whether if in your research there's an answer to this objection.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the objection clearly.
So the objection basically is it's an objection to funnily enough, both from creationists and atheists, right? It's one thing they agree on. But theistic evolution, so God using evolution to bring about human beings, doesn't make sense because it's painful, it's not perfect, it's wasteful, it's taking a long time. So I was just wondering if there's a response to that objection in the class.
I'm not sure if you want me to answer a question that maybe should be asked to God himself. Let's put it this way. But personally, I see evolution is just a beautiful form of creation. The way I see it through science, it makes God even much more respectable in his creation. That there is a law and rules that he goes by in everything that he does, including miracles that we don't understand. Like, for example, Jesus walked on water. We don't understand it. We only know what we know, we don't know what we don't know. We only have 5 senses. Maybe Adam, when he was kicked from the state that he was in, maybe he had 6. Maybe he could see a bigger spectrum of colors, so we could see colors that we can't even imagine. We don't know. Maybe when we evolved into a higher form, like maybe what Adam was before, or what maybe some of the prophets are in, those are higher states, maybe we can answer that. But the way it is, I think it's created a beautiful, pristine world that we ourselves are destroying it, but God has nothing to do with that. God gave us the chance to make it better, to make it worse, and we choose. And I hope that answered that question.
Thank you. Piggybacking on that, come back to Sohan. Doctor, do you consider the process of evolution as cruel or a manifestation of some of the greater?
Well, the process of evolution has simply to be with a combination of variation and natural selection that leads in some cases to adaptation and in some cases to disappearance. So there is no moral value to it one way or another. So I don't see that is not going to help anyone in that particular discussion.
So, any other comments?
Hi. My topic is like you have this universe that is trillions of stars and 10 to the 22 stars and all this gas and dust and everywhere, and you have this tiny blip of life for a minuscule amount of time on this one planet, one star. To the best of my knowledge, even if there's life in maybe some other stars, it's still like a minuscule portion. And even on Earth, there's a minuscule portion of that which actually devoted for habitable by say humans. And additionally, like the vast majority of species that have ever existed are extinct. So it's like why do we know computer scientists or like people who use genetic algorithms, right? We use them because we don't know the solution. Now, omniscient being would know what they want to get out of it, one would think. So yeah, it does not. Cruel, of course, you have to look at it from the perspective of cruel only applies if there's some kind of agent that we ascribe some kind of a moral, responsibility of some kind of moral accountability. So yeah, in that sense, it would seem like a major problem to explain, like why God would do this. Now, explanations we might have heard all around is that even from Christians, like especially from Christians, is that this creating this gigantic universe with this tiny blip of life and creating all this death and this trail of death and feces and everything leading up to what apparent life. Sorry if I'm going to a second. that somehow glorifies God. That means God is just like, so profligate, just can create so much more than is necessary. But just imagine if the universe were instead like just like of an earth, just the earth, just like a flat plane or something, surrounded by a firmament, like a bubble of firmament, and nothing else beyond, and it was just us, no evolution. Would we have been using the reasoning that God doesn't exist because this is not glorious enough for God? I don't think so. So this kind of seems like a situation which is constructed so that God can never lose.
Your final comment,
This is one question. Can I say something? Okay. I think to add to your question, I think it causes problems, this idea of evolution that is not perfect and that has no moral. It causes more problems to intelligent design people. Because if you look at what we have and a lot of things that actually, any good engineer would have actually done much better job. So I think it causes problems to people who claim that if you look around, there's a lot of proof for intelligent design, while in reality, if there was a designer, things could have been done much better than to leave it to a process of adaptation and change based on, challenges.
Thank you. Dr.
Well, this is reminds me actually of the so-called argument from evil against the existence of God. And it goes like this: God is supposed to be omnipotent, that is, he can do anything that he wants to, anything. And he is supposed to be omniscient, that is, he knows everything. And he is good. So if evil things happen in the world, he could have arranged things so it wouldn't happen that way. But he didn't. So he's either not good, or he doesn't know, or he is omnipotent. He's not omnipotent, excuse me. So either one of those will show that God doesn't exist, because for God to exist, he has to have those properties. So that is a problem for religious people, especially the ones who take the sacred books literally. For people who are not religious, I don't see why that is a problem at all. Actually, that's a way of finding out what to expect and what not to expect. Under certain conditions, for example, more complex organisms may be at a huge disadvantage.
So my question is for Mr. Debaja. With respect to evolution, it's nice to see more Muslims in modern day heading toward trying to find some reconciliation. I myself, of course, I'm not a believer anymore, but I feel like we're trying to start with fitting the Quran into what is becoming unavoidable in modern science, that we have to find a way to accept it. So when we look at Christianity, we see that creationism, the sort of, snap your fingers, Adam and Eve on earth, that story has more literal credence from the Bible. Then we see the Quran, instead of clarifying that as a misconception, uses language which is very amenable.
Making a big point.
Yes, that was the line that the panel discussion got over, but we're going to extend it to 5 minutes. So I'll wrap up quick. So we see in the biblical narrative, it very much lends itself to a literal creationism and not evolution. And that's why Christians have struggled with this for a long time. With Islam, most of Islam's history has accepted a very similar creationist narrative, not the 6,000 year older or anything, but the Adam sort of first man kind of narrative. So if God is willing in the Quran to rebuke Christians for taking the sun and saying in very clear terms, no, this is not what happened, but we see him not being very particular from the Quranic narrative about
correcting the misconceptions that lead toward creationism. For me, as a former believer, I see that as God being not very concerned with truth. He's rebuking people for getting it wrong, for changing things, but then he continues to use this ambiguous language that just supports these same kinds of misconceptions. And then it's for us in the last 100 years to say, whoa, we misunderstood it. See this ambiguous stuff, it could actually mean this. And so I want to understand, in your process of going through this, did you ever take a sort of Occam's razor approach and say, if I'm having to pull this from the Quran, and it lent itself to just continuing the biblical narrative, obviously with some changes, am I possibly just trying to find modern science into the Quran as opposed to considering that maybe it's not the Quran?
Thank you. First of all, I think we read the Quran, me and you, different. I don't know if you read it in Arabic or you read it in English or which translation. The interpretation of the Holy Quran is not a Holy Quran and it's not holy. The translation of the Holy Quran is even worse because it's not translation of the Holy Quran, it's a translation of the understanding or of the interpretation of the Holy Quran. They both wrong. First of all, I think to clear everything, I believe we need a new interpretation, not new interpretation, I'm sorry. I'm talking only to the theory of evolution for some people who refuse it. And I'm not talking about majority of Muslims who refuse it. I think majority of Muslims do accept it, including scholars. It's some people that refuse it. We do need new interpretation of the Holy Quran, and most importantly, we need new translation of the Holy Quran, because I notice there's a lot of misconception coming due to translation. There's a lot of loss of meaning in translation. And when I was trying to expand my work to the Holy Bible and the Holy Scriptures, I realized that there is a lot of things lost in the Holy Bible because of translation. That's the first thing. The other thing I want to say is the Holy Quran is not a book of science. It is not. However, when somebody claims that this theory goes against this scientific theory goes against the teaching of the Holy Quran, they have to prove that. My claim is there is nothing in science that contradicts the religion. The religious people or religion does not have a problem with science. It seems like it's the other way around. It seems like scientists have problem with religion, not the other way. I understand there were some events where religious people prosecuted scientists, but this did not happen only in religious community. It happened in every community. And it happened in democracy, it happened in dictatorship, it happened in communism, it happened everywhere. So let's not put religion facing science. Religion have no problem with science. It might be the other way around due to misunderstanding of religion. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I don't know if I answered the question or there is anything else.
Thank you. We'll continue. I know this is a complex discussion. We'll continue during the free time. Alicia.
All right, so I have a couple of questions. I am a professional creative. So when somebody says, I see beauty in this and beauty in that, I always like to investigate what is so beautiful about the approach. Renal ingenesis is a condition that happens in fetuses where they are unable to develop kidneys in the womb. If the pregnancy is carried to term, they die an incredibly painful death in the first few hours of their life. So if evolution is beautiful, I'm very interested in knowing what part of that particular immediate death of the newborn caused by accidents and irregularities in evolution. What is the beautiful part about that? That is just one of many, many examples. Another thing, a recent comment was made about giving examples of in XYZ era, Islam was, Islamic science was given, so much boost, etc., etc. That is actually to the credit of the people. I don't know how much it was accurate, we had all the right anyway, but that's the type of thing. There was a lot of artistic in that. But that is to the credit of the people who did not stay attached to a particular guideline or the book, went beyond that and looked at the stars. Another comment about science has a problem with religion. Absolutely. Absolutely it does. Because Stephen Hawking said that science is based on observation, religion is based on authority. In science, we're not assuming we're not going with this assumption that what we are thinking is true, and all the theory has to, like all the experimentation has to prove this true. In science, you go the other way around. What I'm assuming is probably wrong, let's go and prove this false. And then once in a while, we're like, oh, we actually did the right answer. Yes. So, yeah, science has a problem with religion because religion is based on authority, and that's one of the biggest reasons why science and religion will remain incompatible, because science changes views based on evidence, religion has a permanent intent. So at the end of the day, my first question, where is the beauty in watching a newborn die because of genetic problems that are developed out of evolution, and why not with science, religion altogether, because it does nothing to answer the question. Goes to the assumption that everything the religion says is right and never be wrong. That is all I'm trying to do.
Who would like to start this?
Well, I don't know who ever in the history of science, in the history of evolution, said that evolution was beautiful. I never heard that. And I spent half an hour pointing out why it wasn't. Oh, I see. Some people may find that overall, in spite of the things that happen. As for the authority versus evidence, I think that's the picture that we'd like to have about science. I would like to think that a lot of the time science has been like that, but there have been very important periods in the history of science where science was not like that at all. It was based completely on authority. For example, at the time of Galileo, and at the time of Lavoisier, and then at the time of Darwin, and even today is based on authority. Let me just give you two examples. Okay, one of them you're probably going to dislike, but I'll give them to you anyway. Okay, the first one, not the one you're going to dislike, is that for about 30 years, the government and the medical community pushed really, really hard for something called the food pyramid. And the Association for Diabetes, for example, just jam it down your throat, and all insurance companies and so on. Even though there was lots of evidence, good studies that showed that the whole thing was a serious, serious mistake, that getting 70% of your calories from carbs actually had two most likely effects: to make you fat and to make you diabetic. And finally, they gave it up when it was impossible. Eggs you were not supposed to eat, and the study on eggs was absolutely a miserable study, really bad science, and better science, scientific studies were done, and still the scientific community, the medical scientific community, forced this view on us. It was based on authority, not on evidence. And another one, the one that you won't like, is this. When you hear about climate change, and then you want to find out more about it, what is it that you are told? Are you given the actual reasons? No. You are told this: 98% of scientists agree. That's sheer authority. Sheer authority. Now, what happens when those computer programs, models predict that the temperature increase per decade is going to be 0.21 degrees Celsius, which means in 50 years the temperature will go up 1 degree. And it turns out, not as conservatives may say in blogs, but as the top journals in the world have said time and again, very worried, the actual increase in temperature per decade is 0.04 degrees Celsius. That means the error is a factor of 5. When in quantum physics, you have to be correct within 11 decimal points. When I was a freshman in taking chemistry in college, my answers had to be correct within 4 decimal points. This has an error of 5 within the principle. But if you don't agree with the authority of the 98%, you're a fact denier. So authority is abused. It's used in science all the time, and we are living through it right now.
Okay, we'll take this as an example on the authority in science. We want to go to the example because that's a whole different conference. Dr. Imam, you have a comment?
Yeah. I think that the assumption that religion is also based on authority is debatable. When it comes to Islamic idea of contextual justice and fiqh being situational and changing everything because of the change of times and change of society, then that is a fact. The Sharia or the constantly evolves in that particular sense. But I think just one more thing about understanding religion and Islamic theology. It's all about paradox, and I think the Quranic text is smart enough to put out there much vagueness and ambiguity, so that many smart people can make sense of the text. It doesn't spell out everything, and I think it would be insulting to our intelligence if the Quran had to spell out everything. So in some verses of the Quran that Allah speaks about 50,000 years of your calculation or 1,000 years of your calculation. So it doesn't actually give a specific period of what the day is and what time is, and just weaving that ambiguity. But the beautiful thing is also Islam is against a type of literalism when Islam says about there are muhkamat versus muhkamat wa minhum mutashabihat, and some of them are deliberately ambiguous. When God speaks of laysa kamithli shay wa huwa sami'ul basir, nothing, there's an incomparability of God, and immediately mentions about sight and about hearing. So I think that is, we cannot appreciate religion if we don't appreciate ambiguity and paradox and many of those other issues.
We're going to take the last question, and we promise we're going to extend the break. And here's the last question. Then everyone on the panel can say final word.
I would like to say the biggest contradiction between Islam, but actually in most of the beliefs, is that you have to believe first and then try to believe. And in science, you have to understand it first and then believe. So that's a very difficult to begin with. And that's why we can concentrate on science and different things are there. But they're not based on science. They're beliefs. They are beliefs. But Islam came at the very end of the last, probably the last few years now. It came at the age of science. So it has some of the things that can be explained, but it's belief it first. You try to explain, you try to explain, you will. So that's the main reason why they cannot make Islam and
Thank you. We'll take a final comment from each one of the panel, please, 1 minute each.
I think for some of you who missed the first session when we talked about what is science and what science is not, and when we talked about how the idea that science is mainly based on observations and that observation constitutes our theories, and actually, probably, hopefully you can be able to listen to it. It's actually a bit simplistic. There are a lot of times when people presented theories in science not based on any sense or experiments, but actually, just based, like as I said, like Galileo when he presented the tower experiment. There are many examples in science where theories are come first and later have been validated. So science does not work in the same way we think it does, and I think Dr. Manobar maybe can talk about it more. Also about the scientific authority thing, less than 20 years ago, people who were saying that there's plasticity in the brain, that actually our brain continue to grow even beyond certain time period, they were actually kicked out of conferences, scientific conferences, because scientific authority at that time said it's absolute no way that brain will grow or will adapt after a certain time. And there were other times when, like journals, if you send something to a journal and the scientific journal, and if you don't agree with the paradigm that the scientific authority believes in, you're not going to get published. And I agree with Dr. Munabar. There's even examples in climate change and other areas. So I think authority can be very bad both ways, not religious, but also in science.
Yeah, I think we feel that religion and revelation is super-rational. So that's the position we come from, and I think we also love multivocality, kathra fil wahda and wahda fil kathra, that there's always unity in multiplicity, multiplicity in unity. And so I think scientists and physicians, whoever they are, the more they embrace type of multiplicity, this Islamic pluralism of ideas, and it would be very useful. I'm thinking especially of brain stem death and the other form of understanding brain death. And the Japanese, for all their life, they just took the one position. But here in America, everyone pretended there was only one opinion on when the person is really dead. So we must be honest about that type of diversity if it does exist, and also honest about our own limitations and our own weaknesses, whether it comes to religion, whether it comes to science. But the religion does have certain questions that it answers, the issue of meaning and values and many other issues, and the two can complement each other. They do not have to compete with one another.
Thank you. First, let me respond to the lady that asked me about evolution is beautiful. How is it beautiful? Well, it all depends how you see the cup, half full or half empty. I think we have a lot more to be thankful for than. I agree. There is painful throughout all the species on Earth, but there is a lot to be thankful for. I'm not saying it's intelligent design. I'm not claiming it's intelligent design. I'm claiming is evolution is the creation of Allah. Evolution and religion is not contradicting each other, and I don't see anything wrong with it. Yes, there is a lot of problem with it. I didn't say there isn't, but I don't expect God to be a genie, because where is the beauty of life if God creates a person sitting on a chair right now who's completely perfect, who's never going to die? What is the beauty of life in this? I think the beauty of life is in its differences, in its both pain and happiness. Yes, pain is painful. I'm not saying no, but we have to see that half full of the cup, not just the empty one. That's an answer to your question. I hope I answered it. And to the last question we had, believe first. Yes, believe first, because you believe has to push you into two directions. One is you have to contribute, to do good deeds, to help others. Without those, nowhere in the Holy Quran it says believe. It says believe and do good deeds. And nowhere in the Holy Quran it says believe by itself. To believe is to do a good deed, to help others, to be sensitive about others, to be considerate about others. And the other thing it says believe, to mention believe, is to seek knowledge. Those are the only two places where it says believe. If belief does not push you into that direction, then it's not belief. That's when they ask the Prophet, is my prayer helping me? Tell him, he told them, does it stop you from doing bad things? If it stops you, then it's helping you. And that's what belief is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir.
Well,
in science, in the history of science, the best episodes of the history of science, the ones that people think about it when they think about how science is, we see somebody who questions, challenges the standard view, even though it wasn't just the authority of the church, but actually the authority of evidence. And what they said is, if you look at it this way, that evidence really is not correct. And if we look at it this way, my way, that is, then we can do a lot better. So this ability to question, even in the face of evidence, and change the evidence, which is what Galileo did. So all the evidence against the motion of the earth just disappeared after he questioned it in the way in which he did, which was extremely clever. And then the same for Lavoisier and the discovery of oxygen. Definitely the same for Darwin. When Einstein published his paper on the photoelectric effect, distinguished scientists wrote to the journal to complain for having printed such garbage. And things got even worse when he published his paper on the theory of relativity. And since he was Jewish, German scientists in particular attacked him violently. So what we want to do is to have a situation in all areas of life, not just science, when people can think for themselves. They can make up their own minds, and they are able to question things. Of course, they have to be, if you're questioning something that has a lot of evidence, or seems to have a lot of evidence behind it, you have to be clever enough to say, okay, this is why I think the evidence doesn't work, and so on, and this is a better way of looking at the world that provides different evidence.
Thank you, Dr. Sohan, for the final word.
I would just ask everyone to, in a similar vein, what I said about the Earth and the universe just being like a snow globe and life just being the way it is extant. Ask yourself these kind of counterfactuals. Ask yourself, if you're trying to make scripture and science reconcile, are you just working backwards from the scripture? Are you, spraying the target area with bullets and drawing the target around, the biggest cluster of bullets in the Texas sharpshooter fallacy? It'd be better if you just admit that it's fake. It's a nice story. It may convey some of these stories might convey some moral value. But yeah, if you take these verses and these the scriptures, regardless of which religion, in isolation, and you are just trying to fit the science with them and twist stuff around, twist interpretations around, then you aren't really making progress. It's just you're pretty much wasting a lot of people's time then.
All right, thank you. Thank you for a very diverse panel discussion. It's beautiful to see such a diversity that still creates a beautiful community. And I know that it's like we're binging on a Netflix series today, but we have the grand finale after the break. Please stretch out, walk around, have some food and drinks. And we're having Dr. Stockton Ali Rizvi, who came all the way from Toronto to publish author of Atheist Muslim, and we have also Dr. Majid Hamadi after about 15 minutes of the break. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Muslimish Freethinkers. Do let us know what you think of this episode at facebook.com/Muslimish. Don't forget to visit us at muslimish.org.